Think you know history? Think again? Welcome to Echoes of the Past, where we bring you the untold stories and mysteries that shaped our world. From ancient civilizations to forgotten heroes, we'll explore the incredible tales that history books left behind. Get ready to journey through time and discover the echoes of events that still resonate today. Join us and let's unlock the past together.
Mithridates VI, known as Eupator, is often remembered as one of the greatest enemies of Rome, a king whose name became synonymous with defiance and resilience. His life was marked by ambitious dreams, brutal power struggles, and an unyielding resolve to protect and expand the Kingdom of Pontus. Born around 132 BCE, Mithridates VI was the son of Mithridates V, who ruled Pontus during a tumultuous time in the history of Asia Minor. His early years, however, were anything but peaceful. Mithridates VI's path to power was shaped by a dramatic series of events, beginning with the sudden death of his father. Mithridates V, his father, was poisoned under mysterious circumstances, and his death set off a chain of events that would change the course of history. As a young prince, Mithridates VI was initially seen as a weak heir, barely a teenager when his father passed. His mother, Leotis, assumed regency over Pontus, but her ambitions soon became clear. She sought to consolidate power for herself, undermining her son's authority and striving to make Pontus a more politically aligned kingdom with the ambitions of surrounding empires, including Rome. But Mithridates VI was not the passive figure he appeared to be. Even as a teenager, he understood the intricate and dangerous politics of his time. While his mother ruled in his name, he was anything but powerless. There are stories of Mithridates plotting to escape his mother's court to reclaim his throne, and it's believed that after several failed attempts to murder him, Mithridates was forced into hiding. The young prince fled into the surrounding wilderness, surviving through sheer determination, using his wit, knowledge of the land, and a fierce will to live. It was in these years of exile that Mithridates VI honed the skills that would later make him one of the most formidable monarchs of his time. His survival was not only a result of his physical endurance, but also of his intelligence and growing awareness of the world around him. During his time in the wilds of Pontus, he developed a deep knowledge of the natural world, learning the medicinal properties of plants and poisons. This knowledge would play a key role in his later battles against both his enemies and the forces of Rome. In the mid-120s BCE, Mithridates VI was finally able to return to his kingdom after the assassination of his mother, Leotis. The power vacuum left by her death gave the young prince his chance to reclaim his birthright. With a combination of military force and political maneuvering, Mithridates VI quickly secured his position as the King of Pontus. Yet the region was far from stable, and the king faced immediate threats from both within and outside his borders. At home, Mithridates VI had to deal with internal opposition from nobles who had supported his mother's rule. But more pressing were the threats from the growing Roman Empire, which had been expanding its influence across the eastern Mediterranean. Rome, still in the throes of its expansion, viewed Pontus as an emerging threat. The Romans had long been concerned with the growing power of Mithridates VI, and his rise to power only confirmed their suspicions that Pontus could soon become a rival to Rome's dominance in the region. By the time Mithridates VI ascended to the throne, Rome had established itself as the uncontested superpower of the Mediterranean, and its expansionist policies were increasingly targeting the kingdoms of Asia Minor. The First Mithridatic War would soon be set into motion, but the early years of Mithridates VI's reign were marked by political prudence. He sought alliances, first with the neighboring kingdom of Armenia, which had similar interests in resisting Rome, and later with other regions that could serve as a bulwark against Roman ambitions. Mithridates VI was not only concerned with his kingdom's immediate security, he also harbored grander visions of power. His dream was to create a united front of Greek city-states and Eastern monarchies that could stand against Roman imperialism. It was a vision that went beyond the borders of Pontus. He believed that the Eastern Mediterranean could be unified under his banner, effectively challenging Rome's control. His ambition was not simply to survive, it was to rival and eventually defeat Rome. Rome, however, would not stand idly by. The Roman Senate, with its eye on the wealth and influence of Asia Minor, saw Mithridates VI as an obstacle that had to be removed. In 88 BCE, as Mithridates' ambitions grew clearer, the Romans began to take more aggressive actions to counter his growing power. The situation would soon escalate into full-scale war. But Mithridates was not one to back down. In a moment of political brilliance, he launched the first of what would become the Mithridatic Wars. By 88 BCE, he was already well prepared for the conflict, having built up his army and secured vital alliances. His forces were bolstered by a mixture of Pontic soldiers, Armenian troops, mercenaries, and Greek city-states that had long chafed under Roman rule. The First Mithridatic War was a bold gamble on Mithridates VI's part. He knew that confronting Rome directly was a monumental task, but he believed that by igniting revolts in the Greek cities under Roman control, he could stretch Roman resources thin and disrupt their hold on the region. His forces moved swiftly, taking advantage of the momentary chaos that the Roman Republic was experiencing under the leadership of Sulla. The war would not be a short one, and while Mithridates initially saw success, the Romans under Sulla would eventually rally and defeat his forces, forcing him to retreat. Despite the defeat in the First Mithridatic War, Mithridates VI's resilience was clear. His ambitions had not been dashed, and his ability to survive in the face of overwhelming odds was part of what made him one of history's most fascinating leaders. He would recover, regroup, and soon begin preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Rome again, ultimately setting the stage for the wars that would define his legacy. The rise of Mithridates VI was not just the story of a king. It was the story of a man who had learned from the mistakes of his predecessors and who was willing to take the most daring risks in order to fulfill his vision. His reign, marked by a thirst for power, ambition, and a deep-seated hatred of Rome, would echo through the ages, setting the stage for one of the most memorable conflicts of the ancient world. Mithridates VI Eupator's determination to challenge Rome's supremacy led him directly into conflict, beginning with the First Mithridatic War in 88 BCE. The war was not merely a fight for survival. It was an attempt to overthrow the dominance of Rome in the Eastern Mediterranean and shift the balance of power in the region. In many ways, the war defined the early years of Mithridates VI's reign, establishing him as one of Rome's most formidable adversaries. Mithridates VI's strategic brilliance was evident in how he began the war. His first move was to capitalize on the dissatisfaction of the Greek city-states under Roman control. Many Greek cities, especially those in Asia Minor, had long suffered under Roman economic exploitation, high taxes, and political manipulation. Mithridates, who had been raising an army for several years, positioned himself as a liberator of these cities. He promised to free them from Roman oppression, framing the conflict as a struggle for independence from an imperial power. Mithridates' forces, bolstered by thousands of mercenaries, quickly swept across Asia Minor. Greek cities like Pergamon, Ephesus, and Smyrna joined his cause, seeing the possibility of greater autonomy under his rule. With the support of these cities, Mithridates was able to launch an invasion into Roman-controlled territory. His initial successes were swift and decisive. As he took control of several key cities along the Aegean coast, including the powerful city of Mytilene on Lesbos, and he began to challenge Roman authority in the region. Mithridates VI's initial strategy was brilliant. He knew that he could not defeat Rome head-on with a direct confrontation, at least not at this stage. Instead, he focused on sowing chaos within Rome's sphere of influence. His goal was to weaken Roman control over the Greek cities and disrupt the logistical and economic networks that the Romans had built in the east. He understood that by destabilizing Rome's foothold in Asia Minor, he could force the Republic into a prolonged conflict, one that would drain their resources and stretch their military capabilities. While Mithridates was expanding his influence in Asia Minor, Rome was embroiled in internal strife. The Social War 90–188 BCE, a conflict between Rome and its Italian allies, had severely strained Roman military resources. Rome's political leadership was divided, with two factions at odds over how to handle the ongoing conflict. The situation in Italy forced the Senate to send one of its most competent generals, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, to deal with Mithridates' threat. Sulla, a man with vast military experience, would become the key Roman figure in this war, and his rivalry with Gaius Marius would add further complications to the Roman effort. Sulla's command in the east initially faced several obstacles. His march to confront Mithridates was delayed by political infighting back in Rome, as rival factions sought to undermine his position. Meanwhile, Mithridates was consolidating his control over the Greek cities, establishing himself as their protector and champion. Sulla's delay allowed Mithridates to strengthen his position in the region and gather more support among the local populations, who had grown increasingly disillusioned with Roman imperialism. The war reached a boiling point in 87 BCE when Mithridates executed one of the most notorious acts of brutality of the entire conflict, the massacre of Roman and Italian civilians in Asia Minor. In a brutal stroke aimed at crippling Roman influence in the region, Mithridates ordered the execution of tens of thousands of Roman citizens and Italian allies living in his territories. The massacre, known as the Asiatic Vespers, shocked Rome and enraged the Roman Senate. It marked the beginning of a bloody and vicious conflict between the two powers, one that would last for many years. The massacre hardened Roman resolve and led to a decisive Roman counterattack. Sulla, once he had gathered his forces, launched a full-scale campaign to reclaim the region from Mithridates' control. The conflict would soon shift from an internal struggle for supremacy within Asia Minor to a more conventional war between two established powers. Sulla, with his superior military organization and resources, began to push Mithridates back. The Roman general's ability to rally and reorganize his forces proved crucial in turning the tide of the war. Despite Sulla's success, Mithridates VI proved remarkably resilient. He was not content to simply retreat. Instead, he continued to wage a war of attrition, engaging in a series of guerrilla tactics and sieges that slowed Sulla's advances. Mithridates also made use of his extensive network of allies, particularly in the east, to harass Roman supply lines and forces, forcing Sulla to divide his attention. In the meantime, Mithridates' political maneuvering allowed him to secure additional allies, notably the Kingdom of Armenia, led by King Tigranes the Great, who shared his desire to oppose Roman expansion. Sulla's eventual victory came at the Battle of Chaeronea in 86 BCE. Despite Mithridates' resilience, his forces were decisively defeated. The Roman legions, which had been battered by months of conflict and internal division, proved too disciplined and experienced to be overcome by the Pontic king's forces. Mithridates was forced to retreat once more, and this time he could not afford to escape without consequences. The Treaty of Dardanos, signed in 85 BCE, marked the end of the First Mithridatic War. The terms of the peace were harsh for Mithridates, who was forced to give up most of the territories he had gained, pay a large indemnity to Rome, and promise not to interfere in the affairs of the Greek city-states under Roman control. However, even in defeat, Mithridates VI's spirit remained unbroken. The treaty marked a temporary setback, but his vision for an anti-Roman coalition remained intact. He quickly began rebuilding his military forces and looking for new opportunities to challenge Rome's dominance once more. The First Mithridatic War revealed several important aspects of Mithridates VI's character. He was not simply a ruthless conqueror, but a leader who understood the importance of strategy, diplomacy, and timing. His ability to rebound after significant defeats, his long-term vision for the region, and his cunning political maneuvers made him a dangerous adversary. Though he was temporarily defeated in 85 BCE, Mithridates VI's ambition was far from quelled. His hatred for Rome and his determination to rid the East of Roman control would continue to define his actions in the years to come. The Treaty of Dardanos in 85 BCE marked a temporary setback for Mithridates VI Eupator, but it was by no means the end of his ambitions. Though he had been forced to relinquish much of his hard-won territory and had to pay a hefty indemnity to Rome, Mithridates' resolve to challenge Roman dominance in the East remained unshaken. The loss was a blow to his pride, but it served only to deepen his determination to see Rome's imperial reach curtailed. In the years following the peace treaty, Mithridates VI focused on rebuilding his strength and consolidating his control over his core territories, particularly in Pontus and the neighboring regions. He had learned from his previous defeat and recognized that he needed to prepare more carefully for the next phase of his struggle against Rome. He set about strengthening his military, building a more formidable navy, and seeking out new alliances that could bolster his power and provide a strategic advantage in the future. It was a period of quiet preparation, but Mithridates was always watching for the right moment to strike. The Roman Republic, meanwhile, was embroiled in its own set of internal conflicts. The aftermath of the social war had left the Romans exhausted, and the struggle for control of the Roman Senate between the conservative optimates and the populist populars continued to sow division in the Republic. Sulla, having won the First Mithridatic War, returned to Rome and engaged in a bloody civil war to solidify his power as dictator. This internal chaos left Rome vulnerable and distracted, providing Mithridates VI with the opportunity to rekindle his plans. The chance for Mithridates came in 83 BCE when a power vacuum arose in Asia Minor. The Roman Senate had shifted its focus away from the Eastern Mediterranean, as Sulla's dictatorship occupied much of the Senate's attention. Taking advantage of the situation, Mithridates began to make overtures to the Greek cities in Asia Minor, promising them relief from Roman domination. He also sought alliances with other powers that were eager to challenge Rome, including the Kingdom of Armenia, now under the rule of King Tigranes the Great, a man whom Mithridates had once allied with in the First Mithridatic War. By 83 BCE, Mithridates had rebuilt his army and begun his campaign to reassert his control over the Greek cities of Asia Minor. He used his charisma and political acumen to convince many of these cities to rebel against Rome once more. Mithridates' message was simple. Rome had proven itself incapable of maintaining order in the East, and the people of Asia Minor deserved better leadership. Many Greek cities, disillusioned by Roman corruption and exploitation, rallied to his cause, swelling his ranks with thousands of soldiers, sailors, and mercenaries. Mithridates' resurgence was swift and brutal. He began by moving decisively against the Roman provinces of Asia and Bithynia, driving Roman forces from several key cities. By 82 BCE, Mithridates was once again in control of much of Asia Minor, and his influence seemed poised to spread further. His actions also forced the hand of the Romans, and once again the Senate took notice. The Romans, under a new generation of leaders, began to prepare for the inevitable conflict that was coming. The Second Mithridatic War formally began in 83 BCE with Mithridates' invasion of the Roman province of Asia. His forces advanced quickly, capturing numerous cities and further destabilizing Roman control. Rome, still in the grips of internal turmoil, responded sluggishly at first. However, the Roman general Lucullus was appointed to deal with the Pontic threat. Lucullus, known for his intelligence and military skill, would become the primary Roman opponent to Mithridates during the war. Mithridates VI was well aware that he needed a decisive victory over the Romans to secure his position and legitimacy as the leader of the anti-Roman coalition. He sought to lure Lucullus into a direct confrontation, hoping that his superior numbers and the support of his allies would give him the upper hand. However, Lucullus was a cautious general who preferred to avoid direct confrontation unless the odds were in his favor. As a result, much of the early conflict in the Second Mithridatic War revolved around a series of skirmishes and sieges, rather than the large-scale battles that Mithridates had hoped for. In the meantime, Mithridates once again demonstrated his political savvy. While Lucullus was taking his time to engage, Mithridates used the opportunity to fortify his positions, strengthen his alliances, and build a more formidable defense. He also engaged in a war of attrition, attempting to wear down Roman forces by launching raids and undermining their supply lines. The Roman legions, stretched thin and harassed by constant Pontic attacks, began to feel the strain of the conflict. Despite Mithridates' successes in the early stages of the war, his forces were ultimately hindered by the nature of the conflict. Unlike the more straightforward campaigns he had waged in the past, the Second Mithridatic War was characterized by a prolonged stalemate, with neither side able to deliver a decisive blow. Mithridates' strategy of relying on alliances and guerrilla warfare began to lose its effectiveness against the disciplined Roman legions, and his forces began to falter. At this juncture, the conflict took an unexpected turn. In 71 BCE, a new Roman general, Pompey the Great, was given command of the war against Mithridates. Pompey, who had been rising in prominence after his success in Spain, had a different approach to the war than his predecessors. He was decisive, quick-moving, and determined to finish the conflict once and for all. Unlike Lucullus, Pompey did not hesitate to confront Mithridates directly. Pompey's swift military campaigns, combined with his ability to cut off Mithridates' access to key allies and resources, led to the collapse of the Pontic king's power. By 66 BCE, Mithridates had been driven into retreat and his territories were slowly being reclaimed by Rome. The king, who had once seemed poised to create a new power in the east, was now facing the twilight of his reign. Despite his best efforts, Mithridates VI was unable to withstand the might of Rome's combined military and diplomatic forces. His dream of challenging Rome had been crushed, but his legacy lived on in the struggle that he had sparked. The Second Mithridatic War, while ultimately unsuccessful, had demonstrated the power of resistance, and his legacy as a symbol of defiance would continue to inspire future generations. By 66 BCE, Mithridates VI Eupator was facing the end of his once glorious reign. His long struggle against Rome, which had spanned decades and defined his leadership, was coming to an inevitable close. The relentless campaigns, the shifting alliances, and his defiance of Roman supremacy had all led to a gradual erosion of his power. The forces of Pompey the Great had systematically crushed his defenses, and Mithridates was left with little more than a few loyal followers and the remnants of his once mighty kingdom. The final phase of Mithridates' life was marked by bitterness, frustration, and a relentless pursuit of a lost cause. As his empire crumbled under the weight of Roman military superiority, Mithridates made a last-ditch effort to rebuild his forces and regain control over his territory. He sought refuge with his remaining allies, including King Tigranes of Armenia, but even these alliances were faltering. Mithridates VI had always been a master of diplomacy, But his foreign relationships had grown increasingly fragile as the Romans tightened their grip on the region. Mithridates had once been the ruler of a powerful kingdom, stretching from the shores of the Black Sea to the heart of Asia Minor with the loyalty of many Greek cities and kingdoms. His reign had been characterized by extraordinary ambition, military genius, and a determination to free the East from Roman domination. Yet by 66 BCE, those grand ambitions had been shattered. His power had dwindled to a shadow of what it once was, and his kingdom was increasingly encircled by Roman forces. In a final act of desperation, Mithridates attempted to flee to the kingdom of his son-in-law, Pharnaces II, who ruled over the Bosporan kingdom. This northern kingdom, situated on the edge of the Black Sea, was one of the few places left where Mithridates could still hope for refuge and support. However, even in this final retreat, Mithridates' fortune would not be in his favor. As Mithridates traveled to the Bosporus, he was pursued by Roman forces under the command of Pompey the Great. Pompey, having consolidated his control over the eastern Mediterranean, was determined to bring the last vestiges of Mithridates' power to an end. The Pontic king's fate seemed sealed. But in one of the final chapters of his saga, Mithridates faced a decision that would ultimately define his legacy. Arriving in the Bosporan kingdom in 63 BCE, Mithridates was met with the news that his son-in-law Pharnaces II had betrayed him. Pharnaces, seeing an opportunity to secure his own position, had allied himself with the Romans. Desperation gripped Mithridates. In a last tragic act, he attempted to flee further into exile, but he knew that his prospects were dimming with each passing day. Mithridates VI, unable to accept the defeat that had befallen him and unwilling to face capture by the Romans, turned to his trusted advisors for a final resolution. According to various historical sources, Mithridates ultimately chose to take his own life. Betrayed by his own son-in-law and surrounded by enemies, he took poison in a desperate bid to avoid the humiliation of being paraded through the streets of Rome as a prisoner. However, even in death, Mithridates' legacy was not easily sealed. The poison, which he had consumed on many occasions in an attempt to build immunity, failed to kill him immediately. In his final moments, Mithridates is said to have ordered one of his attendants to complete the deed by striking him with a sword. The death of Mithridates VI Eupator in 63 BCE marked the end of an era. His reign, which had been defined by defiance, military brilliance, and unyielding ambition, came to a tragic and anticlimactic close. He had once dreamed of breaking the chains of Roman imperialism and creating an Eastern empire that could rival the might of Rome. Instead, he became a symbol of both the fragility of such ambitions and the relentless power of the Roman Republic. Mithridates VI Eupator's reign left a deep imprint on the history of the ancient world, and his legacy continues to be a subject of fascination for historians, scholars, and enthusiasts of ancient history. While his efforts to resist Roman domination ultimately failed, his life and reign stand as a testament to the complexity of leadership, the challenges of dealing with a power like Rome, and the costs of ambition. First and foremost, Mithridates was a brilliant strategist and military commander. His early successes in the First and Second Mithridatic Wars demonstrated his keen understanding of both conventional and unconventional warfare. He excelled at using guerrilla tactics, employing his knowledge of terrain and leveraging local alliances to his advantage. His ability to rally diverse groups from Greek cities to Armenian kings showed a political acumen that extended beyond the battlefield. Mithridates also displayed remarkable resilience throughout his long struggle against Rome. Despite suffering setbacks and defeats, he never gave up on his ambition to overthrow Roman rule in the East. His repeated efforts to raise armies, build alliances, and continue his campaigns demonstrated a tenacity that was both admirable and tragic. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, Mithridates refused to accept defeat until his final moments. This tenacity, however, was coupled with a stubbornness that led him to make critical mistakes. particularly in his underestimation of Rome's ability to adapt, regroup, and respond decisively to threats. In addition to his military and political qualities, Mithridates' reign was marked by his efforts to create a multi-ethnic empire that united various peoples under his rule. He attempted to build bridges between different cultures, including the Greeks, Armenians, and the various Anatolian tribes. This cultural and political vision was one of the more ambitious aspects of his reign. He sought to position himself as a protector of the Greek cities, a liberator from Roman oppression, and a champion of Hellenistic culture. However, the very qualities that made Mithridates a formidable foe to Rome also contributed to his downfall. His overconfidence, failure to recognize the limits of his power, and the sheer scope of his ambitions led to his eventual isolation. His alliances, particularly with King Tigranes of Armenia, proved unstable, and his relationships with his own family were marked by betrayal, most notably by his son-in-law Pharnaces II. The internal conflicts within his own court, combined with his inability to achieve a decisive victory over Rome, ultimately weakened his position and led to his defeat. Rome, on the other hand, emerged from the conflict stronger and more resolute than ever. The wars with Mithridates were costly, but they also served to solidify Roman power in the eastern Mediterranean. The fall of Mithridates was followed by an increasing Roman presence in the region, with Pompey's campaigns marking the final phase of Rome's expansion into Asia Minor and the Caucasus. Mithridates VI's death in 63 BCE did not end the Roman domination of the East. Yet his resistance against the Roman juggernaut remains a significant chapter in the history of Rome's imperial expansion. His life was marked by extraordinary ambition, and although he did not achieve his ultimate goal, he left behind a legacy of resistance, strategy, and complexity that continues to captivate historians and those who study the ancient world. Mithridates VI is often remembered as a tragic hero, one whose grand vision of a liberated East was crushed by the unrelenting forces of Roman imperialism. He remains one of the most enigmatic and fascinating figures in ancient history, a king whose brilliant mind and fierce independence ultimately met their tragic end at the hands of his enemies and his own fate.